Okay, so this is the first of two lessons that we'll look at in Unit 3 on consumerism and debt. And of course, this one is consumerism. And the first thing we'll talk about is income. So economic decision making is based on trade-offs, opportunity cost, and interactions that take place in markets. So we're really looking at three things that kind of decide how we want to think about things. So our trade-offs, our opportunity costs, and then the interactions that take place within the markets. And then, of course, we look at the consumers who purchase goods and services. One of the things about consumers, of course, is that when we look to purchase goods, we're really looking to do a couple of things to satisfy our needs and wants. Now, when we do that, of course, we also have to take into account our budgeting. We have to take into account our preferences. But the reality is we purchase goods based on our needs and wants. So items that we absolutely have to have, and then the items that we really would like to have that we have to make a decision on. That's where that opportunity cost comes into play. At the largest portion of it is debating and looking at what it is that we actually want to buy that we don't necessarily have to have. So the hard part for consumers is being able to determine what is a need and what is an actual want. And so part of this determination comes from value. And value, of course, if you'll remember, is based on scarcity and utility. So when we talk about the value of goods, the value of those goods is in part a factor on helping us to determine what we want, what we need as we purchase goods and services in the market. Okay, so what we want to do is break down income. So the ability to consume is based on an available income, and we're going to talk a lot about this as we go throughout this session. We break it down into two sections. On one hand, we have what we call disposable income. Disposable is the money left after taxes. So, for example, I get a paycheck every month. When I get that paycheck, I'm only receiving my disposable income because the taxes are already taken out. So, for example, I'm going to make X amount of dollars, but when I actually get my check, I'm only going to get Y, and then the difference between X and Y is what's going into the governments for taxation, insurance, and things of that nature. And that leaves us with our discretionary income. So we get our disposable income, which is the actual income we take home after paying taxes, and then we have to take that income and we pay all those required bills. So then there's our cell phone bills, internet, cable, all of that kind of stuff. Once we've paid all of that stuff, we're left with a discretionary income. So we're going to look at an example of that, because remember, our discretionary, this is where we can kind of decide what we're going to do with it. So let's just take this monthly salary of $4,000. So we'll pay $800 in taxes, leaving us a disposable income of $3,200. So that's what's actually going to be in the check for you to cash or deposit or whatever you're doing. Now, we take all of our payments. So we got here car payment, house, electric, water, cable, phone, food. Yeah, you don't realize how many bills you're paying until you start doing it every day. So you have all these bills to pay. So that's $2,000 of your income right there. So that leaves you with a discretionary income of $1,200. So now you have that question of what am I doing with that money? So sometimes you'll see discretionary income called play money, because we have that ability to play with what we're going to do. It's not like we're playing Monopoly with it. It's more along the lines of we can play with how we're going to use it. What exactly are we going to use it for? And so this can either be spent or it can be saved, depending on what we're going to do. And I would highly suggest, of course, a portion of this always goes into your savings, because you never know when you're going to need it. So let's break down our discretionary income, because that's the part where we're actually able to spend stuff. So it's discretionary income that is used in consumer choice. There are massive variations in regional and global discretionary income. In other words, the discretionary income in the United States is significantly different from the discretionary income in other parts of the world. And when you look at this map, you'll get a really good idea. So we're looking at the United States having so this is world wealth levels in 2012. So over 100,000 US dollars wealth per adult. In other words, Australia, parts of Europe, the United States, Canada, Japan, New Zealand down there. You see, these are areas in which you have a high average wealth income. In other words, these are places in which discretionary income is much higher than, say, under that $5,000, which is the majority of Africa, India, parts of, you'll see here parts of South America. So it varies. Now, because of that variation, there's a wide range of what people are doing with their money. For example, in the United States, it's far easier to save money because people may have much more discretionary income taken home, whereas that's not the case in other parts of the world. In other words, we take Africa, for example, there may not be enough money after paying bills at discretionary income. It may be just almost nothing. And it's this income that leaves consumers examining the trade-offs and opportunity cost of the decisions that we make. So when we talk about it, what we're looking at is we're saying, okay, let's pay our taxes, which is done for us. Then we have pay our bills. Whatever's left, that portion is then going to be examined through the concept of trade-offs and the opportunity cost. And we do it without ever even realizing it. So consumers have three primary considerations to take into account when making decisions. And this is something we'll look very closely at and look at examples for how people actually consider what they're doing with their money. Okay, we look at this infographic. This is where does the money go? So when we talk about this, it's looking at where is our money being spent. So you'll notice the overwhelmingly large portion of money that we spent comes down here in this housing section. We spend huge amounts of money on housing. Of course, then we have transportation here at 17.6. We have our insurance, we have our food, and these are things, of course, that are increasing. I mean, if you look back at just in the last 2 or 3 years, you'll notice that insurance and food costs have increased, transportation costs have increased because of increases in gas, which is one of the results of people switching into electric cars. So we see these different things. You'll notice 5% entertainment. I mean, this is basically the breakdown of the average U.S. consumer and how they're spending their money. And so you'll notice when you go through it, just take a careful look and see at the different things. You notice education is only 1.9%. You know, in the overall grand scheme of things, in America, we don't actually spend that much money on education. In fact, we actually spend more money per inmate in prison than we actually spend per student in the United States. That should open your eyes to a certain extent. A couple slides ago, we looked at wealth distribution. This is looking at it from a different aspect. This is based off the Gini coefficient. This is something that we'll talk about later in the course. But our Gini coefficient is a measure of dispersion. In other words, it's going to measure equality. The lower the number, the greater the equality that there is within wealth. The higher the number, the less equality there is. In other words, 1 is absolutely equal, 100 is absolutely unequal. So when we look at this map, what we're looking at, of course, is we notice that Australia, large portions of Europe, some places in Asia, and then of course in Canada here in North America, these have 20 to 25 range, whereas in the United States is in that 36 to 45, which is interesting enough. Same as Russia. Also same as India and portions of Africa. But here's what that tells us. What that tells us, of course, is that there is not a place on this planet that has a significant amount of income level distribution like Karl Marx and socialists would have cared for. Remember, they would have liked to have seen a Gini coefficient of 1. Reality is it's just not the case. I mean, you look at the United States and we're talking about a 36 to 45 number. Australia's in the 25 to 35 range. And of course, what those numbers mean is that when we start looking at wealth distribution, obviously there is no place on the planet in which wealth distribution is equal. But wealth distribution in the United States is not as equal as Australia, but it's more equal than it is in China, which has a much higher number. So this just gives you that idea, because one of the things you'll notice is you can kind of go back and coincide and you'll look at the fact that the countries that have a large amount of income distribution are also countries that tend to have a large average of wealth, if that makes sense, and they also tend to be more productive overall. Okay, now we get to the heart of this lesson here. So how do consumers make decisions? How does everyone make the decision on what they're going to purchase with that discretionary income? And so we break it down and say there's 3 primary considerations involved in consumer decision making. One is opportunity cost. That's pretty obvious. We've been on this all this time. So what are we giving up to obtain something? Bottom line is, anytime you purchase something, that means there's something else you're not able to purchase. And so this is a question we ask ourselves whether we realize it or not. In other words, for us, opportunity cost is pretty much an unconscious, it's an unconscious thing. We don't even consider what we're doing. We just do it. So we look at this opportunity cost. What are we going to spend our money on? We've got a game controller, we've got seats probably for an airplane, skateboard, calculator. We have all these decisions that we can make on stuff. The second is rational choice. So opportunity cost involves decisions. We know that. Thus rational choices involved. So what does that mean? Basically, consumers act as if they are balancing cost against benefits. In other words, again, unconsciously, when you start to buy products, you start to determine, is this actually worth what I'm spending my money on, or should I be spending it on something else? Now, not everybody does this, obviously. We have impulse buyers who will just go out and buy something just because they want it. They never consider the rational choice of things. So it's not something that everyone's going to do. But then again, people who do that are making rational choices in other areas. So this leads to an action that maximizes their advantage or provides the greatest value. So you understand that first thing we do is we look at that opportunity cost. And as we do that, rational choice becomes a part of the opportunity cost because we're looking to maximize our income. We maximize what we're buying. That's why people who will go to Best Buy or Walmart or other places, they'll go in there and they'll look around and they'll take notes on what they want, and then they'll go back home and get on eBay or get on Amazon and actually purchase it there because they can get a better value. And stores hate that concept that you'll do that. They can't stand the fact that you can walk in their store, look at their products, get on your phone and see if Amazon has it at a cheaper rate, because it happens all the time. But that's simply consumers making a rational choice based on the opportunity cost they have. It's like shoes, for example. So we look at all these different pairs of shoes. What do you buy? How do you buy? Do you buy based on preference? Is there, for example, taste? Do you look and say, okay, I'm only going to buy Converse, or I'm only going to buy Nike? Because these are different things that make your choice. Do you try a bunch of shoes on and see which ones fit better? There are all of these things that we do that we attempt to maximize the money that we're attempting to spend. So remember that rational people think at the margin. And this is that concept we went early on with the airlines and how they would basically sell off seats just to get people on there, or Microsoft, and essentially selling their tablets at a lower price in an effort to try to recover some of the losses they've had. So the third is scarce resources. Purchasing involves the investment of time and income. So we go back to that resource allocation, first come, first serve. When stores are selling objects, it's very much a first come, first serve basis because of the scarcity of resources. We are purchasing these items, and once we purchase them, no other person can actually have that specific item. Sure, there's tons of iPhones, but in terms of your phone, nobody else has your phone. And so that involves the investment of not only your wealth, but the time it takes you to actually go and spend it. So if you're an Apple fanboy and you wait 6 days in line to get the newest iPhone, we're talking about not only investment of income, but investment of time involved in that decision. And so we often say, okay, income is obvious, but time is not. But time is money. You've heard that statement, and it's true. Somebody once calculated Bill Gates' wealth, and they basically said it would cost Bill Gates more money to bend down and pick up $1 than it would just to walk right by it. So time is our most precious resource. The one thing about time, of course, is we have to really schedule out what we're doing with it. Are we sleeping? Are we awake? Are we eating? What are we doing with our time? So for example, this little cartoon here. So why are you going there? Gas is 10 cents a gallon cheaper at the station 5 minutes that way. And you see that all the time. It says here, because a penny saved is a penny earned. The fact is, if you spend 9 minutes of your time to save $1, you're working for less than minimum wage. In other words, people can drive a farther distance to get to a gas station, but the question is it worth your time? And that's a lot based on your income. If my income is very high, then my time is probably going to be much more well spent because of how much money it would cost me, for example, if I just took a bunch of days off and didn't do any work at all. So since spending is a choice we make, we spend time gathering information to determine what choice we make. That's a part of that time factor. We analyze our decisions as to what we're going to do in the market. And so since time is a resource, it does have an opportunity cost attached to it. For every minute that Apple fanboy spends sitting in the line at Apple, well, that's time he could be doing something else. That's time he potentially could be earning an income somewhere. Okay. So what choice do we make? Ultimately, when we're talking about choice, one of the things we have to kind of consider is this information gathering that we do. We conduct research, we seek advice, you visit stores to compare price and quality, looking at brochures and reading reviews. In other words, when we make big decisions in our life, we take the time, our resource, to figure out exactly what it is we're going to purchase. Especially when we're talking about big purchases like houses, cars. Even from an educational standpoint, what college are you going to? Because you're going to pay to go to school. So when you think about that, are you going to get the education based on the amount of money you're spending? For example, if you go to an Ivy League school, you can expect to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. The question is, are you going to get an education that's worth that much? So all of that comes into play as to what we're going to do. Okay, now we turn to look at budget constraints, and this is a major part of this consumerism concept, because budget constraints are the limits on the consumption bundles that a consumer can afford. And what I mean by that is, when we use the word bundle, we're talking about all of the different products that we could buy in some combination. For example, we're talking about like food, entertainment, clothing. These are all combinations of things that we can buy, and that's that bundle that we talk about. And whatever we purchase is going to be constrained by the budget that we have in front of us. So what a consumer can purchase is constrained by their income. The more income you have, obviously, the more you can purchase, the larger that bundle is going to become. Now we can actually visualize this principle by looking at an economic model. Now remember, our economic models, these are simplified. These are looking at two specific variables. We're looking at something very, very specific. And we're saying, of course, all other factors remaining equal, this is what would happen. And we call this the budget line. And it describes the limits to consumption possibilities. Now you'll notice that word possibilities. So it is similar to the production possibilities curve we examined earlier. If you'll remember on the PPC, what we basically said is that there's this line, and that curve represents the efficiency and the use of resources when producing two different goods for a company. And so as you increase the production of one, you decrease the other because you are maximizing your resources and you don't have any more available. So you could produce along the line, you could produce anything inside the line, but you could never produce anything to the outside of the line without an improvement in technology. Well, the PPC is constrained by present technology. So remember, we can't go outside the line. Whereas the budget line is constrained by present income. So you can think of it in the sense of, as we increase our income, the budget line, of course, is going to shift out to the right. And so we can look at a table showing spending possibilities. So when we look at this, you'll notice we have 6 different possibilities for spending. And we look at 2 products. We're looking at video games per day and we're looking at books per day. So you'll notice as you go down through here, on video games per day, we have $100 available to us. Well, when we start looking at this, video games per day, so 0, and then spending on video games is 0, but we could get 10 books. So you'll notice the video games go up 1 through 5, the books go down 10, 8, 6, 4, 2. As we increase the spending on video games, the amount of money available for buying books goes down. And this happens all the time, is as we increase the amount of income we spend on one item, we're decreasing what we can spend on another. And that's what this shows. We can actually graph it out and actually look visually at it. So if we look at that chart that we had up a second ago, and then we look at the graph, green dots represent every point on that line. There's our possibilities. And on each one of those points, we spend all $100. So when we graph the table, we can see how the budget line looks similar to the PPC. We have that line. Everything inside there is affordable. In other words, everything inside would be some combination along this line are our possibilities. But then everything to the outside of our line is simply unaffordable. So any combination on the line could be spent and everything inside the line is affordable, but all points on the outside of the line are unaffordable based on our present day income. Which means, of course, this line is going to shift to the left or the right based on our income. So let's look at this one here. So this is changes in consumer budget. So pretty simple. Budget line shifts to the left or to the right with changes in the budget. So in this case, the budget line shifts to the right when the budget increases. So if we're going in this direction, we're seeing an increase in income. If we're going in this direction, you'll notice it's shrinking. We see a decrease in income. So when our budget changes, our budget constraint will change as well, because as we increase the amount of income we have, that opens up more possibilities. As we decrease our budget, our constraint becomes much smaller, it shrinks. So you can see this moving to the left and the right based on income. So over the course of your life, one would expect that line to slowly be shifting out to the right as you work, because you'll be seeing incremental pay raises. And maybe there are times, when you're going to face unemployment and that line is going to drop for a while, or it differs. Maybe when you're looking at your disposable income versus your discretionary, maybe your disposable income increases, which of course would reduce your budget. So that line would shift to the left. Okay, so let's look at budgets and prices. So as we can see from the graphs, when the budget changes, the line will shift to the right or to the left. So that's pretty easy to understand. What happens when price changes? That's going to affect things a little differently for us, obviously. So if the price of one good rises and the price of other goods remain the same. So let's say we have 5 products. If the price of one of those goods goes up, the price of the other 4 remain the same, and our budget does not change at all, then our possibilities shrink. And that's easy to understand, because let's take good A. So the price of good A goes up while the other goods remain the same. Well, if we have 5 combinations of goods, well, if good A goes up, then that means more income has to go towards A and less towards any other product. And our budget is staying the same. So when we look at a situation like this where we see no change in our budget and the price increase of one good, then this is what happens. Notice the curve shifts and shrinks to the inside. So you'll notice the first point is the same. What happens is that line essentially swings inward. So you can see here, price of video games rises from $20 to $40. The budget line rotates inward. So it stays along that axis there at the top, but it swings inward. It becomes smaller, so it shrinks, and then it becomes steeper because now there are less possibilities. So this is an easy concept to understand, because you can think about it from the standpoint of, if the price of something goes up and your income changes the same, you have to pay more for that good, then you have to pay less for the other goods in your consumption bundle that you're looking at. So if we go to this one, and so if the price of one good falls when the price of other goods remain the same, as does the budget, the possibilities expand. So if good A goes down and the price of other goods remain the same and our budget remains the same, now our line rotates outward. So if the price of a good increases and our budget does not change, the line rotates inward. Our budget constraint rotates to the inside, it shrinks. On the other hand, if the price of a good goes down, our budget stays the same and the price of other goods remain the same, then our budget constraint line, it's going to swing outward. It's going to expand. It will open up more possibilities for us. So there's a movement from the inside to the outside, rotating on that line. So our budget constraint changes not just because of our income, which causes it shift to the left or the right, but when prices change, it causes it to rotate. So important. A budget line will shift when income changes. A budget line will rotate to the left or right, expand or decrease, when the price of goods change, but our budget stays the same.